Death penalty opponents may be celebrating two major wins. First in Florida, where Governor Jeb Bush has suspended all executions. He made the move after a medical examiner there said that prison officials botched the insertion of the needles when convicted killer Ángel Díaz was put to death earlier this week. The medical examiner says the mistake meant it took Diaz 34 minutes to die.
The horrifying journey of Ángel Nieves Diaz, executed in Florida in 2006 for murder, who denied his guilt until his last breath. He made a spectacular prison escape in Puerto Rico, remained a fugitive for years, and went on to commit another bloody crime. Nicknamed the Father of Death. Ángel Nieves Diaz's life was a long chain of violence and denial. Was he truly innocent as he claimed, or was this the final lie of a cold-blooded criminal? Today, we will unveil the entire story of Ángel Nieves Diaz, from his first steps on the path of crime, to his last meals, his final moments in the execution chamber, and the mysteries of his botched execution. Due to the serious nature of the case, viewer discretion is advised. On December 29, 1979, in Little Gables, Florida, the peace of the Velvet Swing Lounge, a strip club, was shattered by a brutal robbery. Ángel Nieves Diaz, along with two accomplices, Angel Sammy Toro, and another man who was never caught, stormed in, threatened all employees and customers, and locked them in a public restroom. In the chaos, Joseph Nagy, the 49-year-old manager of the club, was shot and killed. Notably, there were no direct witnesses to the moment Mr. Nagy was murdered, as everyone was detained. This lack of direct witnesses would become a great mystery box in the entire case, raising questions about who pulled the trigger and Diaz's true role. Remember the detail of the matchbox with the fingerprint. It will reappear and play a crucial role in bringing Diaz to light. The life of Joseph Nagy, the club manager, was a complete contrast to that of Ángel Nieves Diaz. While Nagy had a stable life, working hard to build a career and care for his family, Diaz slid down the path of crime from a very early age. Joseph Nagy was a middle-aged man, 49 years old, striving to manage the Velvet Swing Lounge. His life was a series of diligent workdays, perhaps, to support his family or to fulfill a dream. His family and friends likely saw him as a pillar, a reliable person. We can imagine the ups and downs he had gone through to get to his current position, a man who had tasted the flavors of life. He never expected that cruel fate would lead him to an encounter with a demon named Ángel Nieves Diaz. He had a quiet life unrelated to the underworld, yet he became the victim of a brutal robbery, ending his life tragically. But there was one detail about Joseph Nagy that even his family didn't know, a special ring he always wore, a memento that would be key to a part of the investigation later on. The life of Ángel Nieves Diaz, nicknamed Papo la Muerte, or Father of Death, is a testament to an early fall from grace. Born in Puerto Rico on August 31, 1951, Diaz entered the world of crime and drugs as a teenager. He married while in high school, but dropped out in his junior year. At 17, Diaz was arrested for heroin possession. At 24, he shot and wounded a police officer during an armed robbery, and was sentenced to 5 to 8 years in prison. According to criminal psychologists, repeated criminal behavior from a young age is often a sign of antisocial personality disorder, where the individual lacks empathy and disregards the consequences of their actions. Diaz showed a clear pattern of escalating violence. In July 1978, while serving his sentence, he killed the director of a drug rehabilitation center by stabbing him 19 times while the victim was sleeping. This was a brutal act demonstrating coldness and bloodlust. Diaz was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. In 1979, Diaz carried out a daring escape from the Rio Piedras State Penitentiary, nearly beating a guard to death. He then fled to Florida, continuing his crime spree. Actions like escaping from prison using aliases and continuing to commit crimes immediately after release show Diaz's contempt for the law and an unshakable determination to maintain his criminal lifestyle. Here are 5 warning signs everyone should know a history of violence, lack of remorse, impulsive behavior, frequent lawbreaking, and a tendency to blame others. The Joseph Nagy case is a multifaceted picture with many different perspectives. From the victim's perspective, Joseph Nagy's death was a tragic end to an ordinary life. He was just a manager doing his job, caught in a horrific robbery and brutally murdered. His death not only took an individual's life, but also left inconsolable grief for his family and loved ones. On the criminal side, Ángel Nieves Diaz constantly asserted his innocence. Throughout his arrest and trial, he maintained a defiant attitude, firing his lawyers and representing himself. Was this the truth, or just the final trick of a cunning criminal trying to manipulate the legal system? Diaz claimed that his accomplice, Angel Sammy Toro, was the one who shot Nagy. This creates a complex perspective, as both suspects had reasons to blame the other. The witnesses, mostly employees and customers of the Velvet Swing Lounge, were all locked in the public restroom when the crime occurred. They did not directly witness the moment Joseph Nagy was shot, but they were the first to discover the body and face the chaos after the robbery. Their testimonies, while not pointing to the shooter, helped sketch the context of the crime and provided important details about the number and behavior of the robbers. Joseph Nagy's family had to face an irreplaceable loss and a desire for justice to be served. They awaited answers as to who took the life of their loved one. Their pain and outrage were the driving forces behind the investigation. They hoped that the perpetrator would pay for their crime. Ángel Nieves Diaz's family also endured a great deal. Despite being relatives of a man sentenced to death, they had their own feelings, perhaps pain, shame, or even a belief in their relative's innocence. They had to live with the label "family of a murderer," facing judgment from society. The murder case of Joseph Nagy initially seemed to be at a standstill due to the lack of direct witnesses. However, the investigators did not give up. Diaz's fingerprint was found on a matchbox left at the crime scene, becoming the first crucial piece of physical evidence linking him to the scene. This was a major breakthrough in the investigation. Then, in February 1981, Diaz was arrested for unrelated assault and weapons charges in Connecticut. He gave police a false name, Emilio Baez, and was released on bail. But before the police discovered Diaz's true identity, he had fled. A few months later, he was arrested again for a federal weapons charge in Middletown, Connecticut. While awaiting trial, Diaz was taken to the Hartford Correctional Center, and once again in August 1981, he escaped with 3 other inmates by holding a guard at knife point and beating another guard. These continuous escapes showed Diaz's recklessness and dangerousness. The biggest turning point came in 1983 when Diaz's girlfriend at the time told police that Diaz was involved in the Nagy murder. This testimony, along with the fingerprint on the matchbox, was enough for police to charge Diaz and Toro with Nagy's murder. Toro pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a life sentence. During Diaz's trial in 1986, the testimony of Ralph Gajus, a cellmate in Dade County who was serving a 20-year sentence for second-degree murder, became critically important. Gajus testified that Diaz had confessed in their cell that he had shot Nagy. Investigators did not know at the time that Gajus's testimony would later be recanted, creating a major crack in the case and raising endless controversy about the fairness of the death sentence. The life of Ángel Nieves Diaz was a long series of chases, spectacular escapes, and false identities. After the murder in Puerto Rico and the violent escape from the Rio Piedras State Penitentiary, Diaz fled to Florida. This was the beginning of an international fugitive journey as he tried to hide in a new world. Diaz lived like a ghost, constantly changing his identity and location. He used the alias Emilio Baez, and when arrested in Florida for minor offenses, he managed to escape on bail. From Florida, he fled north to Connecticut in an attempt to evade the reach of state authorities. In Connecticut, he continued to commit crimes and was arrested on federal weapons charges. Even while detained at the Hartford Correctional Center, Diaz staged another daring escape, once again proving his ability to evade capture and his dangerous nature. Although there are no specific clues that Diaz traveled to countries other than Puerto Rico and the United States, his constant movement between states and use of different identities show a relentless effort to avoid capture. His life on the run was one of high alert, always ready to escape. There were 3 times Diaz was nearly caught while in Connecticut once, when police identified him once, when he was arrested for a weapons charge, and again when he successfully escaped from prison. Each time he got away, Diaz became more reckless. The trial of Ángel Nieves Diaz in 1986 was a dramatic play reflecting the tension and complexity of the justice system. Diaz was charged with first-degree murder for the death of Joseph Nagy. During the trial, he engaged in shocking behavior, threatening witnesses, firing his lawyers, and representing himself. This was a risky legal strategy, but Diaz, ever confident and defiant, chose to follow that path. According to legal experts, self-representation in a serious criminal case like first-degree murder is extremely dangerous. It requires extensive knowledge of the law court procedures and the ability to argue under high pressure. Diaz claimed that Angel Sammy Toro was the one who committed the murder. This was a tactic to blame his accomplice, hoping to create doubt in the minds of the jury. However, the testimony of Ralph Gajus, a cellmate of Diaz, played a crucial role in convicting him. Gajus testified that Diaz had confessed to shooting Nagy in their cell. Although Diaz spoke poor English and Gajus did not understand Spanish, the two communicated using hand signals. The heavy reliance on the testimony of a fellow inmate made the case controversial. In the legal system, inmate testimony is often scrutinized because there may be motives of self-interest, such as a reduced sentence or protection. The jury sentenced Diaz to death by a vote of 8-4. This showed that the jury believed the incriminating evidence, including the fingerprint and Gajus's testimony, despite doubts about the authenticity of a confession made through hand signals. The jury's decision was not only based on physical evidence, but was also influenced by Diaz's attitude in court, his arrogance, and his threatening behavior. The case of Ángel Nieves Diaz was controversial not only because of the evidence, but also because of the recanted confessions and their reliability. After his conviction, Diaz consistently maintained his innocence until his death, creating a fog of uncertainty about the truth. The crux of the controversy lies in the testimony of Ralph Gajus Diaz's cellmate. Gajus had testified that Diaz confessed to shooting Nagy in prison. However, Gajus later recanted this testimony. This immediately raised major questions about the validity of the verdict. If the most important testimony was withdrawn, could the sentence still be considered fair? Forensic linguistics could be used to assess the authenticity of a confession, but in this case, with communication through hand signals and a language barrier, the analysis becomes much more complicated. Did Gajus misunderstand Diaz, or did he have a motive to lie? Experts were divided. Some believed that Gajus might have told the truth initially and then recanted due to pressure or some kind of deal. Others believed that Gajus's testimony was unreliable from the start due to the language barrier and the potential for manipulation. The fact that Toro, the alleged accomplice, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a life sentence adds to the complexity of the case. If Toro pleaded guilty, why was Diaz sentenced to death for the same crime while always maintaining his innocence? This creates a difficult inconsistency to explain. What do you think? Comment below. Do you believe what Diaz said was true? Was he really innocent, or was this just the final sophistry of a murderer? On December 13, 2006, at the Florida State Prison near Rayford, the final hours of Ángel Nieves Diaz took place. The last 24 hours. On December 12, 2006, 24 hours before his execution, Ángel Nieves Diaz refused all the usual final activities. He did not request a special last meal, had no visits from family, nor the usual phone calls and letters that death row inmates typically make. His mood was noted by guards and a chaplain as cold, indifferent, and resolute in defending his innocence. He seemed to have accepted his fate, but not his conviction. Although Diaz declined to order a last meal, the prison still served a standard meal of shredded turkey with taco seasoning, shredded cheese, rice, pinto beans, tortilla shells, apple crisp, and iced tea. However, he refused it all, not touching a single item. Why did Diaz refuse the last meal? This could say a lot about his psychology. Some psychologists suggest this was a final act of resistance, a way for him to assert his autonomy in the face of an unwanted death. It could also be a sign of despair or simply a denial of reality, not accepting the rituals of a condemned man. Compared to other famous last meals, which are often lavish feasts, expressing the final wishes of the condemned, Diaz's refusal shows a particular mindset, possibly a steadfast adherence to his claim of innocence. In the gloomy execution chamber before witnesses, Ángel Nieves, Diaz delivered his final statement in a firm and defiant tone. "The state of Florida is killing an innocent man. The state of Florida is committing a crime because I am innocent. The death penalty is not only a form of vengeance, but it is also a cowardly act by humans. I'm sorry for what is happening to me and my family who have been put through this." These words were not just a denial of guilt, but a direct accusation against the legal system, showing he believed in his innocence until his last breath. Diaz's execution caused an unprecedented wave of controversy. The entire process took about 34 minutes instead of the usual 7.5 minutes, and Diaz required an additional dose of drugs to be executed. His family claimed it was a botched execution. Gretel Plessinger, a spokeswoman for the Florida Department of Corrections, initially stated that Diaz did not feel pain and that a liver condition was the cause of the delay. However, the family denied that Diaz had any such condition. A later investigation concluded that there was negligence in placing the needles in Diaz's arms. The needles had gone through the veins, causing the drugs not to go directly into the bloodstream, but instead to be injected into the soft tissue. This significantly prolonged the time before death. Photos released in 2014 by the New Republic showed horrific discoloration on the inmate's arms, evidence of a painful execution process. With the painful death of Ángel Nieves Diaz, this chapter of the case closed, but it opened a national debate on the lethal injection method and the humanity of the death penalty. Governor Jeb Bush had to postpone all pending executions until further notice, until the new governor, Charlie Crist, lifted the ban. The death of Ángel Nieves Diaz has left a complex legacy and questions that remain unanswered. Although he was executed, the controversies surrounding the fairness of his trial and the incident during his execution still resonate. The Diaz case led to significant changes in the death penalty procedures in Florida. His botched execution forced the state to review its lethal injection protocols, leading Governor Jeb Bush to temporarily halt executions. This prompted investigations and improvements to the process to ensure that future executions would be carried out more humanely. It also contributed to the larger national debate on the legality and morality of the death penalty. However, unanswered questions remain. Was Ángel Nieves Diaz truly innocent, as he claimed until his last breath? Would the recanted testimony of Ralph Gajus have changed the outcome of the case if it had been reconsidered before the execution? These questions remain a cold case in the hearts of those concerned with justice. This case teaches us about the importance of accuracy in criminal proceedings, especially in capital cases. It emphasizes that all evidence and testimony must be scrutinized as thoroughly and objectively as possible. It is also a reminder of the complexity of the criminal mind and the limitations of the justice system in fully understanding hidden motives and truths. If you have any information related to this case or deep thoughts on what happened, please share in the comments below. Should the case of Ángel Nieves Diaz be reopened to clarify the remaining mysteries,